today is going to be called a crash course in Blender. Basically, I'm going to try and go through all the techniques and all the basic shit you need to know to get around Blender or really any 3D environment. So let's start with the basic interface. So we launch Blender and we're greeted here by this default cube, which we're going to want to get rid of somehow. Now the hotkey for that is X, and we can just get rid of that there. So we have here our window, and this is what we navigate around in 3D space. And here we have preferences, which is useful. This has all sorts of add-ons, and up here we can change any form of input shortcut is fully modular and editable. But right now we need to go to add-on, and I'm just going to search in here screencast keys. I'm just going to turn that on, and then I'm going to press N on my keyboard to bring up the menu to this side and turn on screencast keys. Now that's useful because it just allows you to see what letters I'm typing as I'm typing them, and that just gives you a clue about what I'm doing. Now the basic controls to navigate around the 3D interface are scroll to zoom, then on the keyboard, number 1 on the numpad for front view, 7 for top view, 3 for side view, and 5 to toggle perspective orthographic, which you can't really see now, but if I go back into front view and add back a cube and press 5, you can now see it just changes slightly the way we see things. So on 5 it's going to be more of a drawing board grid layout sort of view, and basically it allows you to see everything that's on the plane of view with its perspective somewhat corrected for what's good to be editable. And a way we can just look at this is if we just do some modifications to this here, and of course always E is to extrude, and you can just pull on the translation handles here to move things. Apple or Control Z is undo. So if you do something, you can always go back and undo it. The tab key is to change between object mode and edit mode, which is good. Object mode allows you to view objects such as cubes, spheres, and other such goodness. And if you press tab on any of these objects, you get brought, of course, into edit mode, which is really useful. I'm going to try and make this tutorial really fast paced, but for a complete beginner. So it is indeed what I'm saying it is. It is a crash course. This is quick. So if you're not keeping up, I'm sorry, go watch again. The hotkey to add things is Shift A. Now you can add lots of types of object, and the types we have are mesh. These are objects made up of points, and mostly this is what you'll be working with. If we tab in here and we view vertex mode, and we select all these with Shift and right mouse button to select things, and X to delete, and then just click vertices, we get left with this one point. This is a vertex, and the way all things are made up of in 3D space is connections of vertexes, edges, and faces. So if we just go and extrude this, we now have an object with one edge. And if we go into edge selection mode, oh yes, of course, here are the selection modes for vertices, edges, and faces, which is what everything is made up out of. So we go back into edge view, we can also extrude this edge, and then if we go into face view, we can then of course select it again with right mouse button, and then we can E to extrude a face, and mostly this is how you will be building things up in the 3D environment. But there are other objects we can use. So when we go into mesh, that's essentially what we're talking about, and you will be greeted with a list of primitives that you can build from. A primitive in 3D modeling is basically a shape that's very primitive and algorithmically constructed to be as perfect as we could want it. So here we have, anytime we do an operation in Blender, we're greeted by this panel down here, which allows us to have modifications on that object or that operation that we just did. Now here, if I've just added a cylinder, and we can change how many vertices we are using to make up our cylinder. So if I just change this to 4 vertices, we see we get a cubey looking thing. And if we go 8 vertices, that's pretty much the minimum we can get a smoothable cylinder out of. Pardon me. Okay, so now in Blender we have 2 shading modes, smooth and flat. Smooth is very, very useful for when you're doing things that need to be subsurfed and the such. And flat is better for less complex, more geometrical, inorganic things. But a smooth surface can also be very good for mechanical objects as well, but we'll get into that just a little bit later. So I'm just going to press AA, and I'm going to get rid of everything in our default scene. So A is to select all, by the way, and then I just pressed X to delete, but you should have been able to see that from the screencast. So what other objects do we have? We have curves. Now there are 2 uses for curves. One is if we just add a cube and scale it down, bring it up. We can use I'm just selecting both of these here, and if I go Control P, no, I've done it the wrong way around, see? Cube first, then path, and Control P will allow us to do a follow path command. Now, if we did that right, this should animate our cube around the path. Now, because I didn't have that lined up properly to start with, there's a bit of an offset there, but if I go ahead and line that up with the start of that, and let's go ahead, tab in, and make a couple of extrusions to this Bezier curve, and go again, we can see that our cube follows along the path. This is really useful for animation and the such. Now, Alt-A is to start and stop an animation, and this is the primitive animation timeline here that allows for keyframing and other things. Now, up here we have the outliner. The outliner has a ton of good stuff in it that's really useful. Basically, if I just drag this out a bit, and I'm just going to duplicate this up around so we can... Wait, no, I'm going to add another cube, and I'm just going to duplicate this around, and basically this outlines anything in our 3D scene. So in our 3D scene, if we have the outliner there, we are always able to see what is in our layer, and we're also allowed to change its name. So say I want this to be big cube, and then I can scale that up a bit, and I want to change this one to small cube and scale it down a bit. So we've got a number of cubes here, but just by naming them I can tell the difference between a big cube and a small cube. And it will always be there no matter how many objects I have in a scene. This is really, really good because sometimes you won't be able to find an object so easily once you're working on more complex scenes, and it's a godsend just to be able to go small and type in, and we see we've got small cube there and we know where it is, but oops, where's the big cube? Go big, and we can go and find our big cube object. Okay, now I'm just going to drag that back in. Now we have here, I just need to remember the name of it, properties panels. This gives us a lot of different options, and I'm just going to go and total the scene again and change to our front view and add in a cube. And I'm going to add in a NURB surface. NURBs we'll get into in later tutorials. They're strange little critters, but useful all the same. We've got a lot of things up here that we can do, and it changes contextually to what is here. And I'm just going to add an instance of all the objects so I can now go in detail and just explain what everything is. And just kind of put that in relation to the properties panel as well. So I'm just going to add a sun lamp. Here. And maybe some wind. Okay, so here are all our basic objects. This is an empty. Now, what these guys do is really useful, because say we have our cube here, and we want to animate our cube in an arc, but we don't really have anything in the cube that could say arc. So, and you know, it's all square and it's in the center. Its origin rather is in the center. This is another thing I haven't gone into, which I should now. Every 3D object has a little point in the center called an origin, but it's not necessarily always in the center. It can be anywhere, but basically it's the reference for the 3D world to say where that object is, but also the object can be moved around inside that 3D reference point. And at this point it might all seem a bit esoteric. You have to get stuck in to see. There's no real easy way of explaining some of these concepts. Some of them you just have to go and play. Play is the king of learning. I say play is the king of learning. So we want to put this cube in kind of an arc. So we're gonna select it, then select the empty, and then go Control P again to parent it. Now if we rotate the empty, we can see when we rotate the empty, the cube also rotates around it. Now this is really, really useful, because if we added another empty, we could then go ahead and rotate the empty around the cube and the empty. And we could add in, for instance, a cylinder. I don't know why. And we could have the cylinder going off really somewhere else entirely. And we could parent that to the empty and rotate, and they're both rotating around our origin now. And we could even move this wherever, and it's still going to rotate around this pivot point we've set up. Now that's really, really useful when you're looking at making complex things and animation and such. We've got nub surfaces here. That's primarily what I use empties for. They do have other uses, but you know, I'm not the best in the world. Okay, nub surfaces. Nub surfaces are surfaces that are made up mathematically. And in Blender, they are predominantly curved surfaces and not very good. You modify them about the way you would with a mesh, but they're kind of, frankly, in Blender, they're irritating and pernickety to use. So I'm not knocking nub surfaces here, but don't use them. Not in Blender anyway. If you're looking for a good low-cost nubs editor, I would really try a program called Moi. That's M-O-I. It handles nubs very well. Okay, here we have lattices. We have a lattice here. And to really make use of a lattice in terms of 3D space and the dynamic of a lattice, we have to go into the properties panel, and we can see here in its object data panel in the properties panels, you can change its divisions on the X, Y, and Z axes. So if we just go and give that some divisions there, we can go in here, and I'm just going to tab into edit mode, and now we have a useful opportunity to learn about some of the function menus in Blender. Now we have in Blender 3 specials menus: the Edge Specials menu, the Verts Specials menu, and the Faces Specials menu. Okay, but for now we're just going to go with the general specials, and we're going to bring this up. This gives us a number of things that we can do, and we just want to subdivide it, and we're just going to keep subdividing it. I don't know if this is a crash course or more a random tricks, but no, I think this is a crash course. So if we scale this down and we go click there, click there, shift click and go Control P and make a lattice deformation. If we look in our modifiers panel, when we select the cube, we can see this has applied a lattice modifier. We'll get into modifiers in a second. And if we go into edit mode in the lattice, we have these points that we can kind of move around, and they add deformations to our mesh. And this is what we use lattices for. They're just kind of general deformations, and we can kind of drag around, and we can make our cube all strange. But unlike if we did this without a lattice, it's still all cubey. It's not kind of a random mushy shape. It kind of keeps its edges and keeps looking like a cube, which is useful. Okay, so we're going to go out, and we know what a mesh is, we know what a lattice is, so we don't really need to deal with those much longer. So what do we have left here? So let's get rid of these. Nope. And let's just bring this list of stuff in. Okay, here we have an armature. That's, if I just scale it up, this object here is an armature. Now what these do, if I just add in a cylinder, and I'm going to scale it up and scale it along. Oh yes, two very useful key commands are S and then the X, Y and Z keys. Now scale is simply your S is simply your scale function, and then if you press S and then Z, X or Y, it allows you to constrain to the relevant axes. So I'm going to tab in and I'm going to press Ctrl R. Now that goes into, this allows us to add loop cuts. They're straight cuts around an object. Really, really, really useful. And we're just going to go Z into wireframe mode and put this armature at the bottom here. If we go into this armature and then extrude it and tab out back into object mode, we can again right click, shift right click, and then I'm going to go Control P. No, I'm not. Right click, shift right click, Control P. And then we get this thing here, armature deform, and I'm just going to click with automatic weights. Now if we click on this armature and go over to our modes little menu here, we have pose mode. Now this allows us to add deformations to an object based on the way these armatures are moving in this mode, which is really useful because we can kind of add a kind of organic-ish bend to the shape, which if we just set that smooth, if we just, sure we got the right thing selected and set it smooth, it looks alright, you know, curvy cylindrical-y thing. It's useful. Back to object mode. Okay, now we have two things here. These are rarer things. This is a force field instance, and they are all here. What they basically do is they add forces and stuff when you're doing simulations. That's all I can really describe that as at the moment. And we have a speaker. The speaker here will play a sound that is relevant to 3D space. And we have our camera. Always if you press 0 on the number pad, you can view what the camera is viewing. The camera is really important because if we just add a cube here and kind of bring it out in front of our camera and press 0. Now when we come to the render menu and render image, we can see that we can only render things that our camera can see. You can move it around just like anything else. G or the manipulate handles are to rotate. That's very useful. Okay, so those are the basic oh, and before I finish there, we also have a lamp. This adds light to the scene. The more of these we have, the more light we have, and the more angles the light is coming from. If we go 0 and render image, see, we just added some more light. And let's just get rid of those, get rid of that cube. Let's keep the lamp here. Okay, so we understand objects. We know roughly how to edit them. We at least know how to start playing around with editing them. I assure you there's a lot more you need to learn before you're going to make anything that looks pretty. And we add a cube. Okay, so what's rendering? We looked at that just a couple of seconds ago. Rendering is basically turning this 3D stuff we have and turning it into picture pixels that we can edit into a movie or cut out and put on a website or make a little graphic with. And this is primarily what Blender's all about. Blender is a graphics program, in my opinion. It's not meant for engineering uses or anything like that. I mean, you couldn't design a bridge that you were actually going to build in Blender, but you could design one that looked really damn pretty when you rendered it. So we have in Render two rendering engines as default, the Blender Render and the Cycles Render. Also here we have Blender Game, which is for the game engine, which we will touch on in later tutorials. So if we go into the Cycles rendering engine, we can go ahead and render it, and we have, again, our object rendered with a different engine. But I'm just going to go back into Blender Render rather, and I'm going to go over here to Materials, and I'm going to add a material. Now this is how we add color to our objects in Blender, and these panels hold everything about what our object is and how it's going to look. And we can add different shader types to both the diffuse and the specular. Now the diffuse and the specular, they mean what the words mean in language. For instance, okay, so to understand specularity, we need to understand what specularity is in real life. Specularity in real life is literally like if you have a reflection. That's the best I can kind of muster. And it's the shines and the glints and the places where the light reflects in a slightly different way to its neutral deflections. And the diffuse is its neutral deflection, so that's the main colour of an object. So the best way I can explain this is just to set the diffuse blue and the specularity to red. And I'm going to make that quite hard and quite big, I suppose. So if we render this now, wait, Blender Render, we see nothing because there is no light. Just like in real life, turn the lights off and you can't see. So I'm going to just going to add in a sun, and then I'm going to render image. And we can see that the specularity hasn't really affected our object too much. Add some light coming from a different angle maybe. Hasn't seemed to help much. okay, what I'm trying to do here isn't working, and it's not really being as iterative as it should be, so I'm going to move on to something else. So yeah, that's how we do texturing and the such. Also very crucial is the modifiers panel. This allows us to add different things to or different, damn it, words, I hate you. I want different words. I want words that I know. This allows you to add different modifications to your mesh. For instance, if we go in here, and I'm just going to go through the main things here. I'm just going to go X and face to delete that face there. And I'm just going to go into perspective mode, just because this is going to be a little bit more informative in perspective mode than it would be in orthographic mode. So if we hit solidify, this allows us to control the thickness of a given thing. So that means that we only need to model it once, but we can always give it a thickness later. Meaning we don't have to model both the exterior and the interior of a basic object. And then another is subdivision surface. Now this is what allows us to have to make things kind of curvy. And it allows us to kind of build up meshes with a control cage. So we can be making a curved object with a straight control cage, which is very, very, very useful. Now another modifier we have is the build modifier. This is just a simple one that basically allows us to make a quick building animation. It's, some people swear by it, but I don't think it's that useful. And then we have the bevel modifier. Now if we just tap into edit mode, and we can't actually bevel anything right now, but if we apply the solidifier and tab back in and bring that to 0, this is what our bevel modifier is doing, is it's just making a quick bevel for us. So if we move that above our subsurf and bring our subsurf back in, it's kind of doing something else again, which is useful. And I'm just gonna take everything off again here. We have a mirror modifier, which is really, really useful for working on things that need to be mirrored. So if we go into and start editing here, and another useful just quick tip is Z is to go into wireframe mode and back out, and that allows you to select straight through an object. And another great tool here that I have on, which I need off, which is why I'm going to explain it, is the perspective editing, the proportional editing mode. This allows you to edit things in or out of proportion. So if we click disable, we're only affecting the verts, and if we click enable, we are editing the verts and a certain influence around the verts, which is really, really useful. So let's just disable that and tab out and Z. So kind of looks like Monopoly houses once you've torn the roofs off. Not quite sure why that is, but yeah. So if we get rid of that, we have another modifier called the array modifier, which is really useful. Now this allows you to build up arrays of things and place them on different Oi, axes. Around or in a line from the initial object that you placed. Really useful for objects that you need to have duplicated a lot of times, or for building things up in a more algorithmic fashion. A instance of this would be if we just added quickly a plane and just went into edit mode and added two loop cuts, scaled them in along the x-axis, and then added 2 loop cuts on the y-axis and scaled them in along the y-axis. And then if we just get rid of these faces there, it left with this cross thing, and if we just add on an array and we do another array on the other axis and we just build these up, I don't know why Blender is lagging again. Blender likes to lag out on me. I don't know why. My Blender doesn't like me. My Blender doesn't love me. Oh, I see why it's of it on one of the axes. And that was the first axis I was using, so I didn't really think. Let's just wait a second for this. See if it does it. Which it probably won't. Oh, yes it has. I'm surprised. That's good performance. That's a lot. It's like 45 megabytes worth of fence. Okay, so when we move it lags again. So, okay, good, I've managed to get into this here, and I'm just going to go out and reduce that by a tenth of what it was. Okay, so we've got this grid of little crosses here. That's really big. And it doesn't need to be that big. 18 by 18 will do. So, if we go into edit mode here, if we add, say, a ring cut here, and make an adjustment there, or we add a number there, and also scrolling affects the influence area of your proportional editing. So what if we want to give this fence thing some depth, or this shape some depth? If we just go A and extrude it down a bit, now we have something with depth. Now if we apply both of these, and tab in an A and then W and remove doubles, something you should always do, that removes duplicate vertices. It's very useful. That gives us that, and if we wanted to make that kind of curvy again, we'd add a subdivision surface. Okay, but then we think, wait, that's too curvy. We don't want it so curvy. We want it kind of curvy but kind of straight. If we tab into edit mode, there's a way we can do this. So I'm going to go over to front view, and I'm going to go into vertex mode, and I'm just going to select B to border select, and I'm just going to select all these vertices here, and then I'm just going to go Shift E, and if we go into Control E, we can do a crease from there as well. This is called an edge crease, and this allows us to crease our edges. So they're sharp on one side here and smooth on the other. So let's just get rid of that. And I think this is gonna conclude this. This is gonna conclude this really basic what's happening where tutorial, and I hope it's been useful, and I hope I haven't bored you. And this is the very basics of Blender. I mean, there is a ton more in here, and there's 1,000 other modes, and I feel like I haven't done the software justice right about now, but that's as much as I could cram into a short amount of time just to, oh, what is this? So that's kind of like what this is. Again, I've explained things badly and been a complete failure, but go ahead and enjoy your blendering. And I hope this has prepared you for some of the more advanced tutorials that I'm going to be trying to explain.